Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Festival of Ideas. Before we begin a public service announcement, we believe that someone has dropped a set of keys. If you're short of a set of keys, and you can tell me the name of the cartoon character on the fob, then do collect them at the end. Okay, we're pretty sure it's someone in this room. I'm very happy this evening to welcome Tariq Ramadan here. To tell you who he is, he has an impressive list of titles. His main one is Professor of Contemporary Islamic Studies at Oxford University, but also has positions in Doha, in Malaysia, Kyoto, President of the European think tank, the European Muslim Network. He served on the UK Foreign Office Advisory Group on freedom of religion and belief, and he's been named by Time magazine one of the 7 religious innovators of the 21st century. Has been a frequent appearer on Foreign Policy magazine's list of the 100 most influential thinkers in the world. You get the picture, right? Perhaps more interestingly, you may well know that for 6 years he was denied entry, denied a visa to the United States of America. Interesting, around the same time that Prospect magazine was hailing him as one of the people who could bridge the Islamic world and the West. But just to balance that as well, I think he's currently not allowed entry to 9 Muslim-majority countries as well. So he's an equal opportunity offender, as we might say. Anyway, so we're going to have a conversation up here for about 40 minutes and then open up to questions. I'm sure there'll be plenty. He's here to talk about his book, Islam, The Essentials, which is a beautifully lucid and extremely clear book. Highly recommended. Very important book at this time, I think. But to start off with, I mean, if we just do some of the basics, first of all, starting by, what Islam is in its most general terms. And I thought an interesting place to start would be that, like a lot of people, I think I know what Islam literally means. I think it means submission. But it's a little bit more complicated than that even, isn't it?
Yes. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation here, this festival. Yes, this book is mainly a book of a kind of an introduction, trying to be simple without being simplistic, which is not always easy. And as we were talking, I'm trying to explain some of the terms and notions that we have. And there is one which is translated by Orientalists, but also by Muslims, as Islam means submission. And I think it's wrong. Anyone who speaks Arabic knows that Islam doesn't mean submission. The meaning of submission in English is not the meaning of Islam in Arabic. In Islam, there are 3 words. The first one is salam, peace. And in fact, you have a verse in the Quran saying, enter in God's peace. So in fact, what you have to do is with your heart and your will and your mind to try to find that peace with yourself and peace with God, which is an act of faith. Islam has to do with this. So there is another dimension, Istislam, which means surrender, meaning your will should find its way towards the will of God, which is very close to the Jewish tradition of mirroring the will of God, which is the true freedom is not to do what you want, is to master what you want to the point that you want what God wants for you, which is something also which is deeper than submission. Submission is quite negative. And there is also something which is very important in the notion of Islam, is that there is Islam before Islam, which also is very important. In fact, Abraham and Moses and Jesus were all Muslims from the Islamic tradition, meaning they were connected to God and coming to the agreement between them and God, which is this original contract that was there between humanity and the one God. And this is Islam. So in fact, Islam was at the time of Moses, Judaism. Islam was at the time of Jesus, Christianity. So there is something which is continuing the whole process. So you can see here that even this notion of Islam is not exactly what we mean when we translate that.
Yeah. Okay, and of course, you talked about that progression, Judaism, Christianity to Islam. And the key point in that is the revelation of the Quran to Muhammad, and that message of the revelation. And again, there are 4 cardinal points of that message. And again, perhaps it's just worth specifying what those are.
Yes, so the first thing which is essential, the first dimension, which in fact we can, if you try to define what is Islam as the final message, is one central notion, which is called in Arabic Tawheed, which is the oneness of God. He's the one, and He's the only one. And you cannot say about Him only what He says about Himself. So you have to rely on the relation. It's very close to, once again, you have a philosopher like Kant who didn't want even to speak about God, and you have in the Jewish tradition something which is avoid naming Him. In the Islamic tradition, there is something which is very important. Be humble enough to understand that what you can say about Him is what He is saying about Himself, and you cannot define Him. The only thing that you can do in your life is to come close to Him without defining Him. So no definition, no representation, no drawing, no painting about God. Nothing is like what you can imagine about Him. So this is one. The second message, which is also very important, is coming from the revelation, is the connection that you have with God is about praying. Prayer, it's essential. So as you know, the Muslims are praying 5 times a day. And this connection is also something which is very important. There is the rituals that you have in the Islamic tradition. So one of them, and the second, the most important one, is praying. And that you have coming from the message is the very essence of what does it mean to pray. Meaning by this, that the essence of Islam is a spiritual dimension. And unfortunately, this is what I'm saying in the book, that 98% of my talks when it comes to Islam is about violence, what Islam is not, and not about this spiritual dimension, which is connecting, in fact, again, what Islam is with all the other monotheistic tradition. There is also something which is very important in the message, is you can't be with God as the first being and the only being, and you cannot be with yourself if you don't get something which is essential in the message from the very beginning, is to care about the poor people. So straight away, when you read the Quran, and you know the Quran, when you read it, what is at the beginning of the Quran is not what was revealed first. If you want to come to what was revealed first in the Quran, you have to read the last chapters. And the last chapter are all of them are talking about the poor people. So look at the poor people, and there is something which is essential in the revelation. To reveal means to remove the veil. It's to reveal the meaning of things. And in fact, coming from the very beginning of Islam, is to reveal the invisible. Make visible the invisible. What is invisible in front of you? 2 things. The first is the poor people. You don't see them in the society. They are invisible within the society. So now God is telling you, you want to come close to me? Look at the invisible people in your society. Come close to the poor. Come close to the last, you will be close to the first. So that's an essential message which is coming in 1 week. We are starting Ramadan, for example. It's exactly the message of Ramadan is try to experience what poverty is by not drinking, not eating, and you will come close by mastering the human dimension of your being, drinking and eating. You come close to the divine spirit that is with you. This is the third dimension. And the fourth one, it's also something which is essential, that this life is not the only life. When the people are saying we have only one life, Islam with Christianity and Judaism is saying, no, there is another life after this life. And you have to come back to God. And come back to God is the notion of the ultimate judgment, the final judgment, the day of judgment, which is very important. But in the mystical tradition, there is something which is even much more than that. It's to understand that you come from Him and you will go back to Him. So there is a sense that our life is a journey, coming from Him and going back to Him. And the revelation coming is telling us, if you come back, if you come from God and you go back to Him, it means that your life has a meaning. And the meaning is this journey coming back to Him. So that's also what is revealed through the book.
Yeah. Now, if you look at Islam today, it's interesting because on the one hand, there is certain aspects of unity, things that all Muslims agree. There's also a lot of diversity. But before I just go on, just to clarify, those 4 things you set out so far, would it be correct to say there would be things which all Muslims would assert to as 4 central cardinal points of the message?
Yes, and this is why. If we look at this diversity that we have, all the Muslims would agree on at least 3 dimensions. The first one is the oneness of God. Mm-hmm. The second is the 5 pillars of Islam, meaning you pray 5 times a day, you fast during the months of Ramadan, you perform the pilgrimage once in your life, and you give the zakat, the social purifying tax, which is 2.5% of your wealth to the poor people, which is not an act of charity, it's the right of the poor on your money. So every rich man or woman should know that poor people have rights on your money. So that's the other way around. And you have something which is called charity, which is sadaqah, but it's not zakat. Zakat is the purifying social tax. Tax, it's an obligation, social, towards the poor people, purifying, because the way you pray with your body to purify your heart, the way you give the money with your heart to purify your money. So it's the same purifying process on a spiritual dimension. And then on this, we agree that the 5 pillars of Islam, and we also agree on the 6 pillars of faith, meaning that the invisible, it's part of what we believe. It's the act of faith. For example, there is one God, that there were prophets and messengers, that there is a day of judgment, that there were books before. So a Muslim, whatever is his or her interpretation, should acknowledge the fact that Christianity, it's one of the 3 religions of the book. So because there is a book, there is the Bible, the same with the Jewish tradition. So it's acknowledging the fact that there were books before. So these 6 pillars of faith, even though in the Shia tradition we don't call them the 6 pillars of faith, we agree on this. So this is why I'm always saying to sociologists or people who are looking at Muslims around the world, don't put an S to Islam by saying, they are Islams, because you see this diversity. It's as if you look at Christianity and you say there are Christianities and Judaisms. No, you have Christianity and many interpretations, many traditions within. It's exactly the same with Islam. We have one Islam and many Muslim trends and interpretations.
Yeah. Well, if we look at those, some of those distinctions within Islam, because they're extremely interesting. I mean, there's obviously the Shia and Sunni, which perhaps may come up in a question, or we can just park for the moment. But I think more interesting than that, perhaps, is you think that the way people talk about Islam, they normally present a distinction between what they call moderates and what they call fundamentalists. Now, you've got 5 categories, and I know there are 5, so it could be a bit long. Perhaps we could do this fairly briefly, but I think it's quite helpful. You talk about, it's better to think of broad camps: literalists, traditionalists, reformists, rationalists, and mystics. This makes more sense. Could you just say a little bit about what the distinction between those 5 types of Muslim are?
Let me, because this is essential. You know, under colonialism, it was very easy to say, you know, there are 2 types of people: the good and the bad. The good are collaborating and the bad are resisting. This is what we had. And what we have today, and I wrote an article in the States, and it was about good Muslim, bad Muslims. It's very patronizing and wrong to think that you have only 2 types of Muslims: the good Muslims or the moderate Muslims, and the fundamentalists and the extremists. I think that that's not the reality. Islam is as complex as Christianity. And I would say that, yes, there are 5 currents and trends, but even before that, you have 3 levels that you need to get. At the highest level, you have the difference that you know today between the Shia and the Sunni. This is the first level of 2 traditions. You even have a third one that it's not even mentioned, but if you go to Oman or if you go to Zanzibar, you will find people, al-Ibadi, who are also 1% of the Muslims, but they are Muslims. They are not Shia and they are not Sunni. So this is 3 at the highest level. Within the 3 traditions, you have schools of law. And in our history as Muslims, we had more than 30 schools of law. So you find Muslims being Sunni, Shafi'i, Hanbali, the people that you know today, Wahhabi, it's one school of law among others. So you have more than 30. Today we have in the Sunni tradition more than 4 or 5, depending on how we consider. In the Shia you have the same. So you have schools of law. This is the second level. And then you have schools of thought. So you have, for example, people studying philosophy, people studying the legal tradition, people studying the mystical tradition, people studying fields where, for example, is Ilm al-Kalam. It's a philosophy, theology from within. So we have schools of thought that are not the same, and some are rejecting. For example, in the book, I'm talking about the mystics, and some of the Salafi, the literalists coming from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, would say that these are not even Muslims. So when I'm talking now to you, there is something that you have to understand. I'm not representing all the Muslims. One of the trends is not even considering me as a Muslim. Or in the list of ISIL or Daesh, I'm even worse than non-Muslims because I'm dangerous, because I'm distorting Islam from within. So you can see here that there is a diversity. And then at the level of that, what we are talking about, there are 5 trends. And this is why it's very important not to come with a simplistic categorization of the people, the good and the bad, to try to understand how the people are dealing with their text. So I'm trying to categorize them from within by saying, if I want to understand the people, the best is to ask myself how the people are reading the text. So you have people reading the text in a very literalist way. So they take what we call now fundamentalists or people who are literalists. So they take the text, it's written black, it means black. And they are confusing the principles in history with the models. So for example, they come to you and they tell you, as we have with the Salafi today, or the Wahhabi, they say, the Prophet was dressed in such a way. If we want to follow his path, we need to dress exactly the same. The reformist, another trend, saying, no, what you have to follow is the principle of modesty, not the way he was dressed. He was dressed for his culture, so you keep the principle, you change the model. This is the reformist trend, which is different from the literalist. And rationalists would say, it's even, we have to go further than that. It's not important to get the principle, it's to get the structure, the way you can have autonomy with your own mind. So something that is produced with your own mind, which does not contradict the text, is fine with it. So rationality could be an independent process. So you have a 3rd trend. You have a 4th trend saying it's good, but it's very superficial. Because the text is saying something that you can get only with your heart, not with your mind. So you understand your text to use your mind, and you get the light with your heart. So you need to get the light. Who is saying this? The Sufi, the mystical tradition, saying it's not about understanding, it's about loving. So you read the text with your heart, not with your mind. And in fact, you read better the text with your mind when your heart is open. So open your heart, you will get the batin. The batin is the invisible dimension of the meaning that you can get only with your heart, not with your mind. It's another trend. And you have also people who are more traditionalist, who are following a very specific school of thought that came in history, and they say they knew better than us, so now we follow them. So if you go in some countries, for example, I was recently in Morocco, they say we are following a very specific tradition, school. They are traditionalists. When you look at them in the street, they dress the same, but they don't think the same. And in fact, they say they think against one another. Because the literalists, they think that the traditionalists are putting somebody between them and the text. So it's wrong. So you have all these trends, and you see how complex it is. So if at the end of this talk, we say, wow, it's complex. Mm-hmm. I say, we are on the right track. Why? Because this is exactly the starting point of a fruitful dialogue between us. Is the starting point of mutual respect is to acknowledge that you are as complex as I am. So coming from the Christian tradition, you know it's complex. The Christian tradition is complex. Between the Protestant and the Catholic, within the Catholic, it's the same with the Jewish tradition. It's even the same with the Buddhist. If you get the sense that Buddhism is monolithic, you don't know about Buddhism because it's very complex. There are tensions and differences. It's exactly the same among Muslims.
Yeah. I mean, that scheme, actually, you could kind of give examples of that from Christianity as well, can you? Yeah. Literalists being sort of like what we call the biblical fundamentalists, traditionalists being like Roman Catholics, I guess, who base their the tradition of the church is part of the teachings. Exactly. Reformists, more kind of the Protestant type, and rationalists, mystics is a very much smaller in Christianity. But of those trends, I mean, is it possible to say, I know very roughly, the sort of dominance of these in the Islamic world today? I mean, which is the larger group? Which is the smaller group? Which are the ones with the dominance?
That's a very good question, and it's difficult, and it depends on the countries and the realities. If you look, for example, today, I would say that among the people, ordinary Muslims, the most important, the mainstream, and it's, once again, the mainstream doesn't mean, the mainstream that you have in African countries, for example, and today in the West, are the reformists. The reformists. The more visible are not the reformists. The more visible when it comes to practicing Islam are the literalists. And they are gaining ground. And that's the problem. That's the problem, because here, in political terms, we have a problem. That sometimes our governments in the West are asking and expecting from the Muslim to be moderate, but in the way they deal with politics, they deal with governments that are promoting the more literalist trends. If you deal with Saudi Arabia, if you deal with the Gulf states, for other reasons than religion, of course, for oil and everything, but at the same time, you are connecting with people who are nurturing a very literalist ideology. And that's very problematic. Saudi Arabia is one of the countries where I cannot go, because that's exactly what I'm saying, is that this country is producing a way of reading the scriptural sources which is very literalist, what we call Salafi Wahhabi today. But you have them in our societies. They are still a minority, but they are efficient by the way they are gaining ground today, much more. There is a huge percentage of invisible Muslims who are mystics. And Sufi circles are very effective. In this country, you have lots of Sufi circles, but they don't want to be visible. They want to be in the. They don't want. The whole philosophy of mysticism is you should not even notice. So if somebody is coming to you and say, you know what, I am a Sufi, there is a problem. You don't say I'm a Sufi, because this is something that you keep for yourself. It's a personal journey with God. And you have lots of people who are in this tradition. Among the most, when you look at the books that are most sold on religion, the Sufi tradition, and I'm sure that you heard about Rumi, you heard about Ibn Arabi. These are figures that are so important in the Sufi tradition. And then you have people who are not so visible, and depending on the country, following a very specific school. For example, if you go in Afghanistan, you heard about the Taliban. The Taliban are traditionalists. And these Taliban were supported by the Saudi, because the Saudi wanted to re-educate them about what Islam is, because they were following a school, and the Saudi was saying you have to come back to the literalist understanding. So apparently they were dressing exactly the same, but these were two different schools. So, for example, in Afghanistan, the mainstream dealing with power was mainly people who were literalists and coming from Saudi Arabia, and traditionalists at the grassroots level. So every time you have to look at the country and understand. For example, you go to Senegal. Senegal is a country, 80% of the Senegalese are Muslims. The great tradition there are people, a very, very small group of people following a tradition, and the two most important trends are mystical trends. But the El-Tijaniyya, El-Muridiyya, these are two mystics. And for example, you can't be a president of Senegal if you don't go through one of them, because they are so powerful and wealthy at the same time that they can decide who is going to be the next president. Or at least the next president should go through them to get the support. So these are things that are not known, but if you enter into, for example, you go in Indonesia, the most important Muslim countries, the biggest Muslim majority countries that you have in the world, it's also there that you have Sufi trends, you have reformist trends, but you also have now gaining ground Salafi, and the Salafi are playing that role. And we can't avoid talking about violent extremist groups, and once again, they are very, very, very marginal. But they are covering in the media. There are so much there in the media that we think that they are very important in the Muslim communities, and very often these people are completely external, marginal, not within the Muslim communities, even here in the UK.
One of the important things you talk about in the book, which is very helpful, is the distinction between religion and culture and their relationship. You say something here which is actually, I think, just a statement about history, actually, as much as it is a statement about the nature of Islam. You say that whatever in a given culture did not contradict a tenet of Islam was integrated into the religious substrate of that culture, so much so that it has been extremely difficult to distinguish between religion and culture. So there have been, Islam doesn't have exactly, it doesn't have the same character in the culture in places like Indonesia and Malaysia as it does in the Arabic countries and so forth. Now, because of that, perhaps the important thing for our purposes today is that also suggests to you that the possibility of a Western Islam is a very real one. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yes, that's an essential question. And the way I put it when it comes to religion and culture, I put it in a very simple way, and it shows how much it's complex. There is no religion without culture. Wherever you go, religion is rooted in a specific culture. So Christianity in African countries is not the same as in Europe. So culture is always playing a role. So there is no religion without culture, and there is no culture without religion. Go to any culture, you will see, even in our Western culture, we speak about secular culture, but the fact that we don't work on Sunday or Saturday and our festivals, it's all based or related to a religion, or religions even. So there is no culture without religion. So no religion without culture, no culture without religion, but religion is not culture. So it's not the same, and it's complex. How do we differentiate this? It's the principles that you have and the way you have to deal. In the Islamic tradition, from the very beginning, you had a saying which is very powerful, which says in Arabic, الحكمة ضلة المسلم فهو أولى بها أين ما وجدها. Wisdom is the lost property of the believer. He will take it from wherever he finds or she finds it. So if you find wisdom somewhere, take it. It's yours. So wherever you go, you take it. And I put it like this for Western Muslims. When you talk to somebody, you say, you have a good idea, it's mine. You have a bad idea, it's yours. That's a very important mindset. If you look at, and this is why I very early, 30 years ago, I started speaking about being a European Muslim. I'm Muslim by religion, Egyptian by memory, but I'm a European by culture. So my culture, it's a European culture. So there is something that I call European Islam. And even in Europe, we have many cultures. If you talk to British Muslims, you don't talk the same, and you don't understand, and you don't get the same as if you talk with French Muslims. The French Muslims are very French, and the British Muslims are very British. So we have to deal with the cultural dimension. Why is it important to get that? Because it's when you acknowledge this, when you acknowledge that your culture is the culture, and that there are, even what I'm saying to many European Muslims, that there are many things in the European cultures that are more Islamic than what you have in the patriarchal cultures of origin, the Arab culture. So you should not Arabize yourself to be a good European Muslim. You should be a European Muslim and remain and take from the culture. So we have today something which is European Islam, as we have American Islam, and we have British Islam. It doesn't mean that there are Islams. There is one Islam, but a British Islam as to the culture. The cultural dimension of it is going to be, and everything which is good, ethically speaking, in the British culture, it's mine. I don't have a problem with this. So if I have you put on the table all the drinks and the British drinks and the British meats that we have, meals that we have, I will take everything except what is prohibited in my religion. So no alcohol, no pork and ham, but everything else I can. So it's a very positive way of dealing with this. So in history, it was very positive. This is why you have Muslims in India, Muslims in African countries, and the Western Muslims were scared of this experience, thinking that there is something which is a contradiction. So for the last 30 years, writing about the fact that there is nothing wrong in acknowledging the fact that you are European, that your identities are multiple identities. So the way I'm defining myself is very simple. I am Swiss by nationality, Egyptian by memory, European by culture, Moroccan by adoption, and Universalist by principle. These are all my identities. So it's part of me. And that's a way you deal with things, and you can now get a sense that you should be confident with the fact that you are in this country, and these are your countries, and you are part of the country. So all what is done today, and what we had, all the rhetoric coming from Daesh, for example, and ISIL, what we have now with these people who are killing innocent people, what they want is exactly the opposite of what I'm saying now. What they want is the fracture, the division in our societies. What we are saying is that no, we don't have a problem. We have to come together as Europeans and acknowledge the fact that it is our common belonging to the country, to the society, to the culture, and come together in the name of the same principles.
I can see how the sort of more hysterical clash of civilizations kind of a narrative is unhelpful and just completely wrong. At the same time, I do wonder, are we in danger of overstating the ease of, of which one can be what you call a European Muslim? Because are there not some tensions? To give a few examples, you say, okay, I just won't have the alcohol. That's fine, but alcohol is actually a huge part of Western culture, right? And it's not just that I won't take it. You quote in the book yourself from the Quran saying that alcohol is a loathsome evil of Satan's doing. Now, that surely creates a kind of tension for a Muslim group in a country, and also that's an old traditional thing. And then more contemporary values. So in a lot of Western countries in recent years, the mainstream view has switched entirely towards equality for homosexuals and so forth. But again, as you say in the book, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting, as I understand what we were saying, is although there's a large degree of different varieties of opinions about how exactly one should think of homosexuality as a Muslim, virtually everyone agrees that homosexual acts are sinful and wrong. So with things like that, this doesn't mean a clash of civilizations and war and all that kind of stuff, but there are tensions, aren't there? And do we not need to acknowledge those if we're going to be able to work through them?
Yes, I think you are right on and this is what I'm trying to do in the book. I'm not avoiding all the controversial issues in the book. I'm trying to deal with this. And no one can deny the fact that the mainstream position of Muslims and Islam and all the tradition is to say homosexuality is not promoted by Islam, as it is not promoted by Christianity and Judaism. The question is, can we push to the point that you have to acknowledge that this is right? No, I think that the point for me, and this is what I think the Muslims should get in a clear way, whatever is your take on what the people do, you can and you have, the starting point of everything is total respect towards the beings. So you respect the beings. Homosexual or not homosexual, you can't just deny the dignity of the beings. Now, you agree or not with what the people are doing, but you can't go beyond acknowledging the dignity. So this is where the discussion is very important, because yes, it's sensitive. What does it mean? It means that people can disagree with the fact that I'm fasting or that I'm praying. That's fine. You disagree with what I'm doing, you have to acknowledge and respect who I am. It's exactly the position that we need for everything in our society. So the starting point is not, don't push the people to acknowledge that all what the people are doing is right against their own conscience. But the disagreement on behavior cannot go as far as denying the dignity of the being, and then you cannot condemn the being. You disagree with the behavior, but you don't condemn the being. And I think that within a pluralistic society, mutual respect is based on this. It's based on the starting point of our discussion. You cannot in any way deny the fact that my dignity is as important and as valuable as yours. Now, you agree or not with what I'm doing, it's my business. It's none of your business. Don't condemn and acknowledge and respect who I am. So that's also something which is essential, because many people, they can, for example, I was born and raised in Switzerland. I was practicing and it was a high level of sport. And you know how it is after football when you are with the team, they are all drinking. And I was not. But I got something which was essential. They disagreed, many of them. They were not even understanding, how come you cannot drink? That's so good. That's life. Okay, but what I was expecting from them and what I got is, you disagree with my way of life, but you respect who I am. And this, I think, is the starting point of pluralism within our society. And this is what I want the Muslims to get in our society today. It's to go beyond judging and being judgmental and putting people in hell or putting people in paradise in a way which is very simplistic and which is not acceptable for me. I think that you can't have mutual respect if you start judging the people by putting them in hell or putting them or deciding that you are the only right people. And you have this discourse. We have this literalist discourse sometimes.
So we talked in the context of, say, in Europe, in a Muslim majority country, would you say that the most, can you say, truthful and most authentically Islamic way of approaching those issues would be to allow people to do in their own homes whatever they wanted, and that therefore, people shouldn't be prosecuted, for example, for homosexual acts, even in Islamic majority countries?
I took this position and in clear way, facing the Egyptian government when homosexuals, 20 of them were condemned, and I think you are instrumentalizing this just because you are a dictator. I think that's wrong. I said exactly the same in Senegal, exactly the same in Morocco, and I think that we have to be consistent. What I'm saying in the West should be said exactly the same in Muslim majority countries, that you can't go towards judging the people, and some are instrumentalizing religion in a way which is the tougher we are with the people, the more Muslims or the more Islamic we are with the principles, which is completely wrong. The only way to be a good Muslim is to be just and respectful, is not to be tough and to start with punishment. I think that this is the complete wrong way of dealing with our religion. And once again, that's something which is not accepted by dictators or by some Muslim majority countries.
You said earlier you're not here speaking for all Muslims. How many Muslims actually are you speaking for? Because reading the book, I mean, the book was extremely interesting and very encouraging, and one might see it as like countering lots of stereotypes. But actually, in various points, you do point out that your view is in major disagreement with a lot of what's going on in what you call Muslim majority societies. So, for example, talk of the Islamic bomb in Pakistan, you say, is an absolute contradiction in terms. There can be no such thing. You say that Muslim majority societies have gravely neglected basic education, and that the great majority of mainly Muslim societies limit the fundamental right to the exercise of freedom across the board. And there are quite a lot of things like that. So actually, when we're hearing you talk about what Islam is, to what extent are you advocating an understanding of Islam which actually isn't widely shared around the world?
No, I think that it's the opposite. I'm always facing this, and especially in the West, but also in Muslim majority countries, when the people like what I'm saying, that's good what he's saying, but he's alone.
Right.
That's the good Islam, but who is following this guy? And when the people don't like what I'm saying, and especially in the West, they say, oh yes, but he has lots of followers. So it's as if confirming. So in fact, that's not true. I have been working at the grassroots level for 30 years, and I'm traveling around the world. If you look at, for example, what is happening in the West, what I'm saying is that it's known today that this perception and this understanding of Islam, working at the grassroots level and within academia for the last 30 years, if you go, for example, just to give you an example of the connection that and the work of training the people, having more than 2 million followers on Facebook and reaching 8 millions, and during Ramadan, 40 millions with the Chronicles of Ramadan. In the Muslim majority countries as well as in the West, means that these words are heard, that there is something which is happening at the grassroots level. So I think that there is a mainstream wherever I go today. And more than that, which is for me most important, is the historical experience of Western Muslims will have a tremendous impact on Muslims in Muslim majority countries, which was not the case 30 years ago. 30 years ago, we were expecting answers coming from Saudi Arabia, coming from Egypt, because we didn't know. Now we are providing answers to some of the questions which are very important. For example, if, 30 years ago, if you were to ask me about the secular society, it wouldn't have been clear for me, because I'm coming from a country in Egypt where the secular were dictators. Nasser as a secular was not a democrat. So then you start reassessing and studying, and we have been studying now. We have a better understanding of secular. A secularism is not against religion. It's a space where all the religions could live together and not against, which is not what was done by the secularists in Muslim majority countries. So with time now, we are coming with new answers, new understanding, new vision for the future. And now some of the answers that we are bringing now are heard. For example, in the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics that I have in Qatar, now we are bringing our thoughts there. So the book that I wrote, Radical Reform, Islamic Ethic and Liberation, I brought the views over there, and now we are training scholars in the Muslim majority countries, in India, in Indonesia, in the Arab world. So we are trying to do the work, and I think our experience now, it's not to westernize Islam, But some of our questions dealing with science, dealing with rationality, dealing with philosophy are going to have an impact. So it's heard. Now it's true that you have trends that are not going to accept that. So in the Gulf states, very difficult. In Saudi Arabia, very difficult. In some countries, for example, now, it's very difficult to be heard. But, for example, when I go to Indonesia or when I go in Malaysia and you listen to the way the people are thinking about Islam today, you have a huge trend of people who are reformist. So there is hope.
Yeah, I was going to actually ask you, given how critical you are of a lot of the Muslim majority countries, I wanted, which of the Muslim majority countries in the world would you suggest people look at if they want a more sort of, hopeful idea of
I would say, don't look at the governments.
Right.
Don't look at the governments. So for years, for example, over the last 10 years, we were talking, look, there are things that are quite interesting happening in Turkey, and look at what is now evolving. Very difficult situation with one who is now taking over within the society and the government. So I'm not interested in governments. I'm interested in trends at the grassroots level. And I would tell you, for example, every year I go to African countries. So Western African countries, for example, Ivory Coast, Mali, Senegal, and all these countries, Ghana as well. And go and look at what is happening at the grassroots level. We have trends of women, very well educated, doing the job, and now liberating themselves, and understanding in which way Islam could be a liberating factor for them, close to their tradition, but not accepting, the imposition of the patriarchal reading. So you have, even in Saudi Arabia today, even within Saudi Arabia, even in Qatar, you go to Qatar, you go to the Qatar Foundation, for example, and you look who are the people who are running the show there, and you will see women. Very, very, very present. And they are more and more educated. In the West, for example, today, the young generation of women, they are committed to Islam and at the same time much more knowledgeable about their own religion. So I would say we can have a distorted perception of what is happening in Muslim majority countries if we look at governments. But we have to look at the silent, and the problem with the silent majority. The problem with the silent majority is the silence. That's the problem. So we need to look at this and not to have this distorted image. And even here in the UK, you can be misled with these criminals who are killing, like in Manchester. You can deal with, and what we have to do, and we have to look at, is over the last two generations, 50 years. The silent revolution of the Muslim mindset in Britain, with people being citizens and understanding that they have to be involved and coming together. This is the future. The future are not the people who are killing, the people who are silently building, understanding how much they belong to the country. And I think that this is important.
It is an interesting point, actually. And I think, again, perhaps the invitation is that if we think about the image people have when they think of Muslims is often the visible people, the leaders, the spokespeople. But when people think about the Muslims they know, working in their office, go to their schools and everything, guess what? They join in, they do the same as everyone else, they mix in, there's nothing separate about them at all. Listen, and I'm sure there are lots of questions you'd like to ask, so let me take a few. The first hand I see is over there. If you do want to ask a question, please make sure you raise your hand very clearly and get my attention. The other day someone went like that and I missed them and they were upset.
There's one there.
There and then one there. Great, thank you.
Thank you for your insight. Can I ask what your thoughts are, please, on what the relationship is between Islam and the Christian notion of grace?
Grace.
Say it again?
Yeah. Islam and the Christian notion of grace.
Yeah, indeed.
Grace.
So you don't only have one notion of grace, as you know. Yeah. Okay. It's quite difficult on this. You have also many ways among the Muslim philosophers, thinkers, or theologians, so to speak, on this. There is one consensus, is that at the end of the day, what matters in who you are is what you are going to do. So in fact, all the ethical qualifications in Islam are always about action, not about being. For example, just to get the starting point of this discussion, if you know the Greek philosophy, you know that very often the soul is good and the body, it's where the soul is in prison, so it's mainly bad. So there is a tension here as to the ethical qualification. In Islam, the soul is not good and the body is not bad. What you have to do is to use your soul within your body to do the good. So it's about doing the moral qualification. So the grace that could be beyond this, which is you are chosen because of who you are, is something which is very absent of the Islamic tradition. To the point that, yes, in Islam, the Jews were the chosen people, the Christians were the chosen people, the Muslims were the chosen people, and for only one reason. They are responsible to promoting the good on earth and among people. So it's about what they do, not a grace for who they are. You are what you do. So grace is coming from your action.
This might lead on from that. This is a historical question and shows my ignorance. The three characters you mentioned before who are very important to Islam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus of Nazareth, at what stage did they become part, or were they seen as having this importance and value to Islam? Did this happen in the 8th century, early on? Was it later? Or were they already embedded in the culture of the early Islamic people?
That's a good one because it gives you a sense, the way you deal with history. In the Islamic tradition, what is said is that these Abraham and Moses and Jesus were not known in Mecca. They were known in Medina. And you know, Islam started in Mecca, and after 13 years, there was this exile towards Medina. And in Medina, you have Christians and Jews, not in Mecca. So for the Muslims, in fact, straight away, coming with the first revelation, the revelation is all straight away talking about Abraham, Moses, and Jesus as messengers who were bringing to the world the message of the one God. So this is coming from... So for the Muslims, it's a proof that the text was revealed from God. For the historians who cannot or are not acknowledging the fact that there is God or a revelation, they would say, yes, in fact, the Muslims there were in touch with Christians and Jews who told them about this, and Muhammad wrote this knowing what was around, of course, because for the non-Muslims or for the people who don't believe in God, the text is not coming from God. It's coming from him. So how did he get the knowledge of Abraham? So it should be, for them, it should be through this historical encounter with others. For the Muslims, it's rooted in the tradition. From the very beginning, the revelation is saying, you, as the last messenger, you are following in the footsteps of Abraham, Noah first, and Abraham, and Moses, and Jesus. And they are all messengers and prophets. So it's from the very beginning. They are part of, and they are, in fact, representing what Islam was before Islam. So it's the same message. It's the same God and the same message.
Thank you. Yeah.
In a book I was reading recently, it talked about the aftermath of the US-led invasion of Iraq. And it said that they disbanded the army and the instruments of government. And a lot of those people who were in the original Iraqi army, who were Baathists, are now running ISIS. To defend themselves and their communities, they accepted a more Muslim orientation and accepted the concept of jihad. Can you actually give your views on jihad and what the Baathists did there?
My views on jihad and what the Baptist is.
And is it true that ISIS now is full of the old Iraqi army? It's the old Ba'athist party that are actually running ISIS now.
So there are many, many versions or understanding of what is happening. First, let me say something about jihad. So it's very important to get a deep understanding of jihad. You have some people saying, you know what, you have to remove jihad from the Islamic terminology because it's problematic. I would say no. We have to redefine and understand deeply what it means. In fact, jihad has two dimensions. First is resistance, and second is reform. In fact, to understand the deep meaning of jihad, you have to come to the intimate dimension. And then you can get the collective and external understanding. Deeply, in your own self, you have two attractions. One is you are naturally attracted towards violence and not the so good. And at the same time, you are attracted by the good and honesty and generosity. You have both, selfishness and generosity. The way you resist the bad and you try to reform yourself by using the good is jihad. Resistance to the bad, promoting the good. In society, you are going to do exactly the same. You can be attracted by stealing and cheating, and you can be attracted by serving the poor. You resist the bad and you promote the good. For example, you have jihad against and you have jihad for. Jihad against poverty, jihad for education. For example, in Mauritius, we were all together, Chinese, Catholic, Muslims, and agnostics and atheists coming together, and we launched a jihad against poverty, which is exactly the meaning of resisting poverty and promoting more social justice. And you have a jihad for education, so against the bad and for the good. That's jihad. So now there is one dimension, which is qital. Qital is the armed resistance. And there is only one situation where it's legitimate to resist, is that when you are attacked or colonized, you can use the same means as the oppressor to resist and to reform towards more justice. For example, to resist colonization is legitimate if you are attacked in order to liberate the country. So it's exactly the same with what happened during the Second World War when you are resisting. So that's the only traditional understanding. It's not the only, no, that's not right. I have to be precise on this. You have many traditional understanding. You have people saying, no, as long as you are spreading the good, you can go for this. This was a minority perception. But the mainstream tradition is to say legitimate resistance and reform. What now we have in Iraq, people using the notion of jihad to kill innocent people, to oppress, and to do what they are doing now in Boko Haram in Nigeria, or Daesh, or ISIL, this is completely against the principle of Islam. So there are two things that I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say they are not Muslims, because they are Muslims. And I'm not going to do to them what they are doing to me. They are saying I'm no longer a Muslim. I say, you are Muslims. I'm not putting you outside. But what you are doing in the name of Islam is wrong. And I have to resist. So I would launch a jihad against the jihadists. But that's very important to understand the very notion that it's a jihad is resisting your oppression in the name. And it's not my community right or wrong. It's my community when it's right, and against the people of my community when they are wrong. Because you have a saying coming from the messenger saying, help your brother when he's right or wrong. So one of the companions said, how am I going to help my brother when he's wrong? Prevent him from doing wrong. So your help to the oppressor is to stop oppression. It's not to accept because he's your brother in Islam. So I think that this is something which is very important to understand, that they are distorted. So I'm not going to put them outside Islam. And I'm not going to say, as some Muslims are saying, you know what, it has nothing to do with Islam. No, it has to do with Islam, because these people are quoting the Quran. These people are quoting prophetic traditions. So I have to respond to this. And this is also what I'm doing in the book, is to respond to their rhetoric by saying, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, and you have to resist. So this is wrong. Now, what we also have to understand is, please, when it comes to violent extremism, politics is complex, and we should avoid essentialism. It's they are behaving like this because of Islam. No, some are instrumentalizing Islam for other reasons. And some of these people who are now the leaders of ISIL, for example, they have no religious knowledge. Some of them were in jail with no knowledge, and then all of a sudden they are spiritual leaders or religious leaders. Where are they coming from? We need to look at their own, also their trajectory, the history of these people, because some of them have no religious training. So
we've got other people to get through, so I'm sorry you can't come back.
They put them in mass jails and they are able to liaise because that's where the Americans put them.
Yes, but it's true that some of the leaders were in jail. So some of the people were saying that some are the leaders now, they were under torture within the jail or the American jail. Some others, they came as leaders and they have no credential. What we have to do, and what I think is my moral responsibility, is to make clear that what they are saying and what they are doing in the name of Islam is instrumentalizing Islam and can by no means and no standards can be justified. Never. So I can understand why some people are becoming violent, but this will never justify violence. I can understand why, when somebody is telling me I was tortured, they didn't respect my dignity, I can understand that you are becoming violent. It doesn't justify your violence. So understanding where they are coming from doesn't mean that you are justifying what they are doing. But we need sometimes to understand why the people are violent, for example, when there is no respect of their dignity. I remember once being in Egypt, and I was going to talk to people who were becoming violent, say, it's wrong to be violent. We have to be citizens, and you try to go towards peaceful means. And one came to me and said, you know what? There was one imam, so a religious leader, who was my model. He was talking to the Christians and doing everything. The military, they came and they killed him in front of me. So I decided never talk to these people. I will never talk to these people. They pushed me to resist with my weapons, not with my tongue. I think he's wrong, but I can understand where he's coming from, because he saw the violence. So we have to go from understanding to go to a process which is helping the people to go from natural reaction to a better understanding of what are the means to resist oppression. And it's not violence.
I only get time for one more question, I'm afraid. I'm sorry. By the way, the other day I got a lot of flack because there were no questions from any women, and it's apparently my fault. But I haven't missed any female hands, have I? I've been checking. Okay. Final one. I have to be fairly brief, I'm afraid.
I can sacrifice mine for
No, there isn't anyone. It's gone.
Okay. The writer Shadi Hamid wrote a book called Islamic Exceptionalism, where he argues that, the progress that, the way we've seen in Western countries, where it's led towards secular democracies, is not necessarily the case that will happen in a lot of Muslim majority countries. So he argues that a substantial amount of people in these countries would like to be governed by Islamic law and in for example, a theocracy. So how would that then align with, obviously there's the things within the book that don't necessarily align with a liberal democracy. How would that align with the minorities in the communities, and how would they be governed under Islamic law if that was the case, and if this exceptionalism is something that happens?
That's a very important one, because even in the West, you had questions, put to the people and say, do you want to be governed by Sharia? And many are saying yes. The question is, and I'm trying in the book to explain what Sharia is. It's not about the corporal, the penal code. It's not about the legal framework. Sharia means the way. So it's wider. It's a concept of life and death, concept of God, conception of God, and conception of human being. It's the philosophical frame to which you have to look at all things. Now some people are reducing it to the legal, and they don't know even what they are talking about. So when you ask a Muslim, he's saying, I want to be faithful to my principle. And what is understood by the West is, he wants to implement the penal code. So cutting hands and everything. You have the same question, not the same understanding. So I think that this is one that we have to clarify. What do you mean by Sharia when you want this? And then, for what is very important is to acknowledge the fact that the Muslims, look, you remember what was happening with the Arab Spring, what we were talking about when we saw the people taking to the street in Egypt, in Tunisia, even in Syria, in Libya. What did they want? They wanted freedom, dignity, and justice within the society. It went bad, and the situation is bad today. But you had millions of people taking to the street, asking exactly what you and me, we want for a society. So we have to look at this and say, is it not what is expected by the people? And what we should do is not to confuse Muslims with Arabs. The great majority of Muslims are not Arabs. So look at in Senegal, in Indonesia, even in Turkey, even in Iran, even in other countries, you have democratic processes that not far from being excellent and perfect, but much more than what we have in the Arab world. And we have to try to understand that it has nothing to do with religion, it has to do with internal dynamics within the society. But we have to be serious about this. The great majority of the human beings on earth, what they want is to be free, is to be dignified, and to be respected, and to be heard within the society. What we have today in the great majority of the countries in the Middle East, for example, is no freedom, no democracy, nothing. And the people are saying, in the West, we are saying, we want democracy for you. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we want democracy for everybody. We want democracy for some countries, but we are not very much offended and very much vocal when it comes to democracy for some of the countries that we are dealing with them and having business with them. Because are we very serious about democracy? So why don't we speak so clearly about Saudi Arabia and the status of women over there and the way they are treating, we are talking about migrant workers, for example, the new slavery that we have. Why are we so silent? Do we really care about democratic processes when Bush was saying in 2003 we want to democratize the Middle East? For which reason? To keep interest or to deal with the dignity of the people? And this is where my take on this, what I want, it's for us to be consistent with our own principles. I want the Muslims in Muslim majority countries to be consistent, and this is why I think we have to be very critical towards what is happening there. But I think that we, as European citizens, we have to be also critical towards our own governments. They are speaking too much about democracy and supporting too many dictatorships. And I think that you can't deal with, if you want to stop violence here, ask yourself which type of policies you have over there. If you don't want them to come back to us, which is unjustifiable, never ever we can justify killing the people as it was, what it happened 2 days ago. This has to be condemned. At the same time, what we have to say is ask our government, please, for the sake of our own peace here, just be just with the people there. Promote democracies and human rights there. Don't tell us that our girls are so important and they're dead, not so important. The starting point of international racism is to think that our dead people have more value than their people. I think that cannot work. And I think that this is why we have to start this discussion. This is also where we have to be consistent with our own values. So we all have to be self-critical. No one can lecture the world saying, we know how it works. And we see, and this is also the last words, my point by writing this is what? It's just to make Islam accepted. No, I really want the Muslims to be self-critical, and I want my fellow citizens in the West to wake up, to come together. And you know, I have a book called, a call which is the new we. Who is this new we? It's us here. Whatever your religion, whatever your atheist, agnostic, whoever you are, at the end of the day, are we agreeing that we have common values? And these common values should be the same for people living here and people living in the global south? Are we going to treat the same way the refugees and the migrants, and not to think that our people have more value, and to keep silent when people are being killed every day in Iraq? And this was my answer to Charlie when the people are telling me, you have to be Paris. I say, no, I'm not going to be Paris only. I'm Paris, I'm Damascus, I'm Manchester, I'm Baghdad, I'm Palestine, I'm all the innocent people all the innocent people. No selection and hierarchy when we are dealing with people innocent being killed. I think that this is the starting point of universalism, and I would ask to come with this new we, that we can work together. Thank you.
Well, look, thank you so much. I'm sorry you've got time for questions. A few people saw the hands. You can come and ask Tariq afterwards. He's going to stay here. His books are over there if you'd like to get them, and he'll sign them or answer any questions. There's a lot more in there than we've been able to talk about. In particular, I was hoping to have some time to talk about the correct way of reading the Quran. It's extremely interesting and rich discussion. But anyway, we can't get everything in an hour. All the more reason to go and read the book, which I thoroughly recommend. And apart from that, person with the keys, please come and see me. Other than that, all we need to say is thank you very much for coming and join me in thanking Tariq Ramadan.
Thank you.